Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode on the Honda Fireblade project. So what I want to do in this one is get that engine in the frame. I want to get various bits onto the frame and hopefully get it to be a rolling bike. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put this seat assembly bit on here. I have bought myself some new bolts because the faces of the bolts on that came with the bike were quite chewed up, and I'm not about that. So I want them to look nice and new. So we shall start by oiling those up. And then we've got two different types. We've got that type, and then we've got one that's got like a flanged head. And these, the flange heads go in the top, and then the other ones go in the bottom. So all four of those are torqued up to 59 Newton meters. So we'll do that now and mark those. So that's one of the bearing cups there. And we just do the same on this side. There are two different sizes as well. They're very, very obvious, so hopefully we won't get those mixed up when we're putting them back together. So we're just checking just to make sure there's no damage there. We'll probably clean off those edges of where it's been painted just to make sure that's nice and smooth when we fit the new ones. So we got the two dust seals, then the bearings and the bearing cups themselves. So these are a roller taper bearing in these. So you got sits like that, and then the same on the bottom there. So they're now seated in there nicely. I'll just grab my other camera and show you. So these are now bottomed out on the inside of the frame nicely. So we got that one there. And then we got the same the other side. And you can just run your finger around and just make sure, also do a quick visual and just make sure they're okay. So that's both the top and bottom bearing cups in now. So here we have the next piece of the puzzle, which is the bottom clamp. We've also painted that in the same style paint as this. Once again, that is looking really, really nice. We managed to do some repair to what was some previous damage on the bottom there. We weren't able to do much with this up here. It looks as if it has already had an attempt to repair some of that. As I mentioned before, the bearing is going to sit on this piece here, which although somebody has sanded a section of this lightly, there isn't much in the way of damage there. It's much more up here that we've got some damage on this section. And I think that's going to be in the headstock itself. It's not going to have anything to do with any of this. So it may well be where they've tried to get one of these bearings off previously. So what we've got to go on first is our dust seal. So we've got that sits on there. Then got the bearing itself. So what we will do before we do that, we'll just put a bit of oil on the inside of the race or the inside of the bearing there. Then what we will do is use this pole to drive this on, but what I'm going to do is just wrap this like that, because I don't want any dirt in this pole to go into the bearing itself. So we can do that like so. Just need to find a persuasive device. Yeah, that's now nice and tight. I can feel that seal's nice and tight on there, which is great. So I've put a little bit of grease in this bearing race already. Well, it's not, yeah. So this is roller taper grease, and what I'm going to do is I'm just forcing the grease in behind the rollers. It's certainly not going to look particularly pretty, but we want to try and get the grease packed in there as much as we can. Cool. I wouldn't get very far in an art class, blimey. And I want to try and keep all of this area around the headstock as clean as possible so we don't get a build up of dirt from the grease holding it. So that can now go into there, which is great. So I've just got the manual placed here now, and I'm just referring to that when it comes to looking at which way round all of this stuff goes. So I believe this goes on first, and this is the adjuster nut. So basically that adjusts the clamping force on the steering bearings. So for the moment, I'm just going to do that up hand tight. And then it looks as if this locking washer will go on something like that, followed by this one, and then obviously this is your very top one, which is where it sits in relation to the top yoke. Once that's on, that's the top of the steering stem nut. So here we have our Honda approved tool for doing up the adjuster nut here. What we're going to do is we're going to set the preload on the bearings. I haven't put a patent or a patent, whatever you call it, on this yet, but I've just cannibalised a Halford socket there. Sorry about that, Halfords. But basically, I've just chopped some sections out of that so that that fits nicely into there now. Nicely into there now. So this is anywhere between 13 to 19 Newton meters. So we'll smack it somewhere in the middle. What we will do is we'll just pop a bit of rag in there where the stops are, so it doesn't go scratching the frame up. So that's now clicked and into place, and then what it suggests is that you rotate these 5 times. From lock to lock. So I'm just going to keep, and that's just setting the bearings there. So that's just sorting out the preload. And then it just asks you to check it again. So once again, I've just stuffed a rag in on this side between the frame and the stop for the steering. Feel pretty good. Then you've got your locking washer. So that then sits in there, excuse me, like so. And then you've got this top nut here, and what that top nut does is obviously lock that washer into place along with the bottom one, just to stop them coming undone. So what we're going to do now is, this basically says to do it up finger tight and then bring it round to a point where you can lift those tabs into some of the cutout sections here, but don't go further than 90 degrees. So maybe our tool will still work on this. Look at that. It's a universal tool as well. So we could stop there, or we could go a little bit further and see how that feels. So let's go a little bit further while we're here. Like so. So now both of these collars can go up, and all we're going to do is just use a screwdriver and just lever them up. So again, not getting any notchiness, feels nice and smooth. Haven't got any play there, which is great. And then the next thing we're going to need to do for the frame side of stuff is potentially put the top yoke on. Then we'll need to get a fork leg in so that we can make sure before we do any of this stuff up that they're in alignment with one another, because what we don't want is the bottom one to be twisted from the top and then the fork legs won't fit, and we've talked all of this stuff up already. But what I think I'm going to do for the minute is I'm going to move the frame, or I'm going to leave the frame here, I think, and go back to the engine, finish off that cam cover gasket that's arrived, put the top crankcase breather assembly in. So there we have our fresh gasket. What I'm going to do now is just put a bit of RTV just in these bits here. Then got all of these rubber seals, and they just point up. There is a little, so there's a metal piece on the top of them that just says up. So they go onto there like so. And we've got our bolts for it. And it's 10 Newton meters, the torque setting for these. Now we're just going to whip off the excess sealant, same the other side. So we've got the base plates that go in like so. And we've got the reed valves themselves. So just to plug up the spark plug holes, we are going to put these in ahead of time. If we do need to take them back out or move them, we can, because they do swivel like that. Also just going to change the thermostat seal because I've got one, and I'm just thinking, well, while I've got one and I can reach it, it probably makes sense to do that. That's the part number there if you need it. God blimey, that one really is stuck on there. God, it's so brittle. It's so crunchy and brittle, that old one, so it was well worth getting a new one. So there's a cutout in the centre of this seal, and it just slides onto the thermostat or around the edge of the thermostat like so, and then I just work my fingers round like that, just push it on and make sure that it's home. What I do as well is just take a quick moment to look at the orientation of the thermostat so I know which way it goes, but I can pop that into there. It might seem like a bit of an odd thing to put on at this time, but I am going to fit up the rear or passenger foot pegs and the hangers for those, just because I want to try and start losing bits off of the, or out of the boxes, off of the bench, and start making a bit more of a bike here, so that it's easier to sift through the stuff that I've got. So I have repainted these, done them in a nice silver and then a bit of lacquer, so they do look really quite smart. Just tidies them up a bit. So these are 26 Newton meters. I'll just do the other side now. So as quick as this episode started, it could probably end right here, to be honest. I'd built up all the motivation last night. I thought things are going well. I've got some of the frame together. I could probably put the engine in now and get to that point where that's in, and that would be a real weight off my shoulders, because you then are really at the next step. I also thought potentially I could put all the bearings into the back of the swing arm as well. And then with that, I could then look at putting the rear wheel and stuff on. Then the front can go on and the bike becomes a bit more stable and a bit more of a bike. And that's kind of really where it ended. I've taken the packaging out for the bearings for the swing arm, and for some reason I've only got the inside bearings. So you've got two inner bearings and then you've got needle roller bearings on the outside. On the genuine ones, you've just got one side's got a roller bearing and a needle bearing, and then the other side's just got a larger needle bearing. So unfortunately I haven't got the full kit there. I've got like half of it. So I've got the two outer seals and the inner bearings, and then not the needle roller bearings. So I've had to order that, so I'm gonna have to wait for that to turn up. So that meant that the swing arm and stuff couldn't go on. So I then thought, well, I'll move on to the engine. Hopefully at least I can get it then into the frame and start doing things there. And then that's when the next issue came up. So if I can stop being attacked by the bike. So basically here what we've got is, ignore that bolt and the nut on the side there. So basically what we've got here is, this is like a engine adjuster, if you were. So it's basically a threaded spacer, and what happens is you wind that into the frame, then you put the engine in. So that winds into the frame, the engine then sits against that spacer, and you wind that spacer out accordingly to meet the engine, because obviously the frame is slightly wider. So that meets up against the engine, and then you basically then lock that off with a locking nut, which is there. So you then got like a toothed or a castellated nut there. You lock that off, and then there is a long rod that goes right the way through. Anyway, I've got that one, which is the upper one. Can I find the lower one? No. I've hunted high and low through the boxes. I can't find it anywhere. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to put the engine in the bike, because you need to put these in first. They don't go in through the outside of the frame. They go from the inside out. So unfortunately, that means we can't put the engine in. I've got to try and source a couple of these. So this one, it's meant to have two sort of, where this nut is here, it's meant to have two sort of feet, maybe you might call them. Basically just bits of thread coming off the top there that extend that a bit further. So I am trying to look to see if I can get a pair of those. They are different lengths as well. So the upper one is slightly shorter than the lower one. So I need to get a pair of those. So that's where we've got to. As I say, I had all that motivation, ready to rock and roll, ready to get this thing to the next stage, but unfortunately that's not going to happen. But we're not going to be deterred. We've still got plenty to do, as you can see. So what I'm thinking of doing is slight change of plans, slight course correction. But I'm thinking maybe what I might do is I might just take care of the front of the bike. So we know that we've already been and done the forks, so we can look at putting the forks in. We can look at putting the top yoke on and see how we get on with all of that stuff there. Then if we get the front of the bike built up, what I could potentially do, there's a relatively flat section on the frame at the back here, or in the centre, so I can then prop that up with something soft and just sort of start to level the bike out a bit. Yeah, so we're just going to roll with the punches. We'll keep going. We want to get this thing up and together as soon as possible, really. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to assemble the bits that I'm going to need for the front of the bike, and we can get on with some of the bits on the front here. So firstly, what I'm going to do is remove the little snap rings, the little safety, I think they're the little safety rings. I'm just going to put these up into place. Then all I'm doing for the moment is I'm just locking that off with one of the bolts, only hand tight, just nipping that up so that the fork leg doesn't try and come back out. And then I'm putting that safety clip back on. I have pre-oiled these bolts already, so we're good to go there. And I am going to be sort of semi-holding the frame and assembly, because as I put the weight onto here, as you can see, it's going to try and escape. So getting them semi in the same place. It's not got to be perfect at this point because we'll adjust it in a moment. Very odd way of fitting forks like this. I can't say I've done it like this before. First time for everything, I suppose. Right. There we go. So we have said box. our top yoke there. I'm going to give that a clean before I put that on. So this is just had a clean and a wipe off. That's it. Just going to put that top nut on there for a moment. I'm not going to torque that up just yet. What I do want to do is refer back to the manual, because there are some marks on the forks. You can move them up and down to a point to some of your preference, but what I'd like to do for the moment is just put them in the standard position. And there's 2 marks on the fork legs at the top here. So I just need to see, is it the top one or the bottom one? We've also got some bolts for the top yoke here. So I have just referred back to the manual, as I mentioned a moment ago about the fork leg protrusion. It's the first line. The standard fork setting is the first line on the top of the fork. So we're just going to set that to the same each side. So this is 103 Newton meters. We're just putting our rag down in the stopper there. It's going to be rather interesting. What I'll do with the pen this time is where I'm going to mark it, I'm going to mark a line between the nut and the stem itself, so that way, if ever the nut were to come loose, you'd be able to see it there. So that's the top one done, and then all of these are 23 Newton meters. So what I've done now is I've cleaned this piece here, and this sits underneath like so, I believe, or potentially the other way, like that. So it may well be that I've got to take this back off, but if I can start losing more and more bits, now just going to fit the immobiliser ring for the bike. I have given the outside of all of this a clean before fitting it, just to tidy it up. So just want to snug those up, don't want to go mad with them. Got the ignition lock. Might find out in a minute. I should have done this the other way around, but we shall see. So the manual says that these two that hold this ignition switch on are 26 Newton meters. And there are a couple of little marks on and around this ignition switch, so what I'm going to do is just get my touch-up pen, just touch those in. I wasn't going to worry about painting the whole thing, but I can touch those in and neaten them up. So the front end's looking really quite smart now. It's starting to come along all right. It probably will do quite well in a straight line, but I don't know if you've noticed, I managed to forget to put the handlebars on, so it's probably not going to handle all that well. I've dug those out of one of the boxes, had a look at them. They are in okay condition, but there's a few chips and marks on them, so I've given them a clean, sanded them back. They're currently being painted, or should I say, I've painted them, left them out in the garden to dry. So once they're nice and dry, I'm going to take this bit back off, that top stem nut, take these two bolts back off, pull all of that lot off and put the handlebar clip-ons on and in place, and then torque that lot back down. What I'm thinking I might do now is move on to fitting the front wheel. So I think I'm going to have a bit of a clear up here first, look at getting the front wheel in. We're not going to do it up tight. As we mentioned earlier, we need to bounce the suspension around a bit and get it all in line, make sure it's straight, but we can nip it all into place just so that it holds it steady. And then I'm going to look at what I need to do to try and stabilise the back of the bike. What I'm looking to do now is start assembling the rear wheel up. As you've seen, we've got ourselves a lovely fresh tyre, new valve on there, and I want to get everything fitted up so I can balance the wheel. This is the rear disc here, and I don't know if you're going to be able to quite make that out on camera. Maybe I'll pop round and show you. But here on the top, or should I say here on the face of the disc, we've got quite a bit of pitting here, and if you use a ballpoint pen you can actually feel the ballpoint pen sticks into these little grooves here. So I have ordered a rear disc and I'm waiting for that to arrive. So we're going to discard that old one, pardon the pun. We got ourselves a new sprocket, so that's going to go onto the sprocket carrier. We've got some new wheel bearings with new seals. I have just used some of this Rockall Dirt Blaster just to give the sprocket carrier a good clean, make sure that that's all free from any contaminants and dirt. I have also cleaned and washed all of the bolts so that they're all clean. So we should be okay. I've got the manual here as well, and the manual just suggests using a socket and a hammer to drive the bearings into place. I have pre-cleaned these surfaces where the bearings sit and just made sure that they're free from damage. So we can just line the bearing up like so. And then we're just going to use, I've got a 36mm socket here, which covers the very outer ridge of the bearing there. So I'm just going to put a bit of lubricant on here just to ease or aid the fitting of this. We're just being gentle with it. What we want to make sure is we just tap it in nice and even. When it is home, you will hear a noticeable noise difference when you're tapping the bearing into place. You can also feel with your finger, and you can flip the wheel up and just have a look through as best as possible the other side. That now feels in place, so we'll just give it a little bit more of a tap just to make sure, and then that rotates nice and freely. Then we've got our dust seal. It just pushes into place. I flip the wheel the other way up. I have also done this surface area. This bearing in here is slightly smaller, and then the other two and the seal, these two here and the seal, go into the sprocket carrier there. So we do need to put this centre tube in before we forget, and then we can't get, and then we haven't put it in. So like so. Just going to grab a slightly smaller socket for this one. Okay, that's now into place. We've got that one that sits there. That sits over the top. Then these two bearings sit into there. Oh, with the seal on the end. So hopefully that's just a closer look. So we've got this bearing in with this seal in, nice and flush. And then if we flip the wheel over, we've then got this bearing in here. We've obviously got the cushions and stuff to go in as well. And there is a little rubber seal that sits round here. We'll do that in a moment. I'm going to move the wheel out of the way for a second. And then what we're going to look at doing now is fitting these two bearings into the sprocket carrier. So both of these have got the same internal and external diameter. You do want to check that, because the one that goes in the wheel for this side has a slightly narrower diameter internally, and then this shim spacer, whatever you want to call it, won't fit. So basically these two sit into here, and then this sits underneath, but obviously in those bearings like so. So we're going to drive these bearings into here first, and then what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over. I'm going to put a socket here to hold that, and then we're going to push this into the bearings there. So what we'll do, we just put a bit of oil in there. Can do is just keep an eye on here. So that's those bearings now all in place in the sprocket carrier. I've just double checked just to make sure this is all seated nicely. The bearings are seated up against one another. What we can look at doing now is putting this seal in here. I did end up doing this on the floor, knocking these bearings in, because it was really loud on this bench. So that then just goes into here. So we're going to push that in, but we're just going to secure here with a socket. So if we use something like that on top there, we should be able to just tap that in. That's now all in place, nice and smooth. Then we can just put our seal in. So now we've got the drive cushions that we can put back into the wheel. I have checked these already. They do seem to be in good order. Just give them a bit of a wipe off. Is that rubber seal that we mentioned earlier? Pop that on and into place. Before I do that, just going to have to drop the sprocket bolts into there. Got our new sprocket. Look at that. Just going to put a bit of oil where the washers seat. And on the threads here. Just going to get a socket to bottom these all down and then we'll torque them up. Oh, look at all these shiny new parts. Oh, it looks so good. So this is 64 Newton meters for these, and we're going to do them in a star pattern. That's now all we can do with the rear wheel for the minute. I have got the two spacers here for that. I've also got the axle tube as well. So what we could do is just slide that in and slide those spacers on there for the minute, just to stop all of this lot falling out. We are waiting for the rear disc still, and I am cleaning and going to zinc plate the disc bolts that hold that on. But the rest of it is looking really smart now. So it's now time for us to build up the front wheel. We've cleaned and checked the discs. There is a little bit of surface corrosion to a certain section, or a small section of the disc. It looks as if that's probably where it's been sat up for some time previously, where the brake caliper is. That's what it's sort of indicating. So we've given those a clean, we've given the bolts a clean, and now it's just a case of putting these back on. So we want to look at the arrow for which way the wheel is going, and then we want to put the disc in the same place for that. So you've got an arrow on the disc just here, so we're going to look to put that down in place. Put that on there. I have also measured these. They are 4mm minimum thickness. It's quite handy because it actually says that on the disc. So I've just looked for any scores or imperfections and just measured them across multiple points using a micrometer. So now I'm just going to be putting some thread locker onto each of the bolts. We'll wind all of the bolts in and then we can torque them up. So these are 20 Newton meters. Then it's just going to be rinse and repeat on the other side. So that's the discs now on. What I'm going to do is clean the surface areas of where the bearings sit, and I am going to go for a different approach to what I did on the rear wheel. I wasn't particularly happy with knocking it in with a socket and a hammer. I've got a sleeve pulling tool that I'm going to try and use and basically thread the bar or the threaded rod right the way through and see if we can pull both the bearings into place at the same time. So we'll give that a go and see if that's a bit better. So as you can see here, I've got a threaded bar right the way through, as I mentioned, and some spacers here, and we're just using this to gently wind this in, and I'm just using my left hand here and holding this one in place. So we're just slowly winding these in. So that's those now into place, so we can look at putting the dust seals in. I have also made sure I've got the centre tube in there before I fitted the bearings. Lovely, and the other side. That's it. I could not have found a more cack-handed way to have done that. So I'm going to leave these bolts obviously out because we're not going to touch them just yet, but I am going to get the nut that secures this axle through the wheel. I'm just going to bring that to meet up so that it just holds this somewhat together, double check our tyre rotation, we're okay there. I'm probably also going to look at what I need to do to maybe strap the back of this down, because I'd rather it didn't fall off. Next thing I'm going to do is get the clutch lever on. I've just put a rag on the bottom of the line, cable tied that off, just so we don't get any clutch fluid onto the lovely new paintwork. I'm not too worried at the moment around the position of this. I'm just purely putting it on and then just nipping it up gently, and then I'll work out the position of where I want it to go and adjust all of that once I'm sort of sat on the bike and the bike's a bit more together, so you can get an idea of where you want this to go. So the next one we've got is the kill switch and the starter. So again, that's got a little lug. Just going to lift that over. Probably should have done it the other way around, put this on first. But as I said to you before, we're sort of in and out of boxes. Shorter screw and a longer screw. And once again, I have already given this a clean and degrease prior to fitting it. That's it for that one. Just mark them up. You can get the horn on there now. So that's the horn now on. What I was thinking of doing next was probably starting to build up the front brakes, but unfortunately I cannot find the front brake hoses. So I've looked in all the boxes, they're not there. So I've just ordered an upgraded set of braided lines for the front of the bike. So when they turn up, we can put them on. What I don't want to risk is putting any of the components on with them not sealed, i.e. the hoses on to both the caliper and the brake reservoir, the master cylinder up on the handlebars, because I just don't want to risk getting any brake fluid on there. They're not new components. Obviously the brake master cylinder and the brake calipers are used and they've still got some brake fluid in there, so I don't want to risk that. So I'm going to have a clear up here and rethink my game plans, see what we can look at putting on next. So that's it for today's episode, guys. I'm going to leave it here. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily gone to plan, but when you're doing project bikes like this, that's just one of those things. We have ordered some front upgraded brake lines because they're missing. I can't find them anywhere, so I've ordered a fresh pair of them. Some of the Hell ones. So hopefully they'll turn up, and in the next episode we can get all the front brakes on and do a bit more on the front end. I've also ordered the engine mounts, or the adjuster shims, whatever we want to call those, and hopefully they should turn up as well, so then we can get the engine in. And I've also reordered a complete swing arm bearing kit as well, so when that turns up we can get all the swing arm on, we can get all that rear linkage on that we've done, we can get the shock sorted, get that in, and we can just really get going with this thing. So I really hope that you've enjoyed watching today's episode. I really hope that you're enjoying the Honda Fireblade project as much as I am. I don't know if the camera's quite doing this thing justice, but it looks absolutely incredible, and I cannot wait to get this thing to a point where it's on the road and you guys see the finished project or product, because it really is something special. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.